Konnichiwa minasan, welcome back to the Deep Dive, the show where we bravely cannonball into topics smarter people would probably tiptoe around. It's your host, yes, the only person foolish enough to spend his weekend reading depositions, academic CVs, and very weirdly formatted emails, coming to you live with caffeine, confusion, and just a sprinkle of shame. Today's episode? Ooh, buckle up. We are diving into a scandal involving Jeffrey Epstein, the late financier, convicted sex offender, and overall poster child for how to be rich and creepy, Lawrence Summers, former Harvard president, former Treasury secretary, and current holder of the Guinness World Record for most meetings with people he probably shouldn't have met, and Keyu Jin, Chinese economist, rising academic star, and daughter of a high-ranking Chinese official, who found herself orbiting this mess in the world's most awkward Venn diagram: academics, international finance, and, wait, why were you on that email? So yeah, this episode is basically economics, geopolitics, and one extremely suspicious guest list. Grab your matcha latte, let's suffer together.
Okay, first things first, whenever Epstein shows up in a store, you know the vibes are going south faster than a cheap airplane ticket. And every time you ask, why were so many fancy people connected to this guy, the universe responds with, Barbamois, networking is weird. Now Lawrence Summers, brilliant economist, big brain, big resume, big judgment challenges. He reportedly interacted with Epstein socially and professionally in ways that make every PR team in America break out in hives. And to be fair, Summers was far from the only powerful person whose calendar suddenly looks spicy in hindsight. Then we have Keyu Jin, rising star economist, respected academic, global finance wonderkind. Her name pops up in reporting and correspondence that placed her in the wider social professional orbit around Summers and Epstein-linked circles. Not criminal activity, just the kind of elite network proximity that makes normal people go, wow, academia is just linked in with better suits. Let's be clear, we're talking about optics, associations, questions of influence, reputation risks, not accusations of misconduct. Still, the trio together, it's like a crossover episode nobody asked for. Like Marvel, but if every Avenger had a lawyer standing behind them whispering, no comments please.
All right, let's get into the truly bizarre part of all this. At the heart of the personal scandal, you've got this setup that just sounds like it's from a terrible movie. You have Lawrence Summers, a married man, former Treasury secretary, one of the most powerful economists on the planet, and he's seeking romantic advice. But who's his advisor? His confidant in this whole thing? It's Jeffrey Epstein, a convicted sex offender. And the object of this whole situation? The economist Keyu Jin.
Yeah, so Epstein apparently called himself Summers' Liao Ji, which is Mandarin for wingman. Think about that for a second. The former head of the U.S. Treasury needed a wingman, and the person he trusted for that role was Jeffrey Epstein. I mean, this goes so far beyond the casual friendship, right? It suggests a really deep level of trust and confidence, where Summers is literally relying on Epstein for strategic advice on his personal life. It's a choice.
So here's how it reportedly went down. According to the source, the whole thing had a pattern. Step 1. Jin sends a totally normal, professional email to Summers, maybe asking for some feedback on a research paper. Step 2. Summers, instead of just replying, forwards that private email to Epstein. And Step 3. Epstein then gives him tactical advice on how to craft a response. We're talking stuff like, make her wait a bit before you reply. It's basically turning a professional correspondence into some kind of strategic social game.
So as you can imagine, this back and forth got pretty sensitive. So sensitive, in fact, that they apparently stopped using Keyu Jin's real name in their messages. Instead, they came up with a code name. And man, in hindsight, that code name is just dripping with irony.
The code name was Peril. Seriously. And, the wildest part is that Summers himself apparently described his feelings in a very similar way. He allegedly felt trapped by the whole thing, fully aware of the huge risks to his marriage, his career, his entire reputation. But even knowing he was in peril, he kept going, with Epstein as his guide. And then, we get to this text message from June 2019. It's an absolute bombshell. Summers was apparently discussing the chances of sleeping with Peril. Epstein's response is just devastatingly clear. He says, the probability of you sleeping with P again is basically 0. And that's the word, isn't it? Again. According to the source's analysis, that one little word changes everything. It suggests that this wasn't about a first time. It implies a sexual encounter had already happened, at least once. This whole conversation was about whether it could happen a second time.
And if you look at the timeline, you can see just how fast this all escalated and then imploded. The really intense communication kicks off in late 2018. By March 2019, Summers is telling Epstein that keeping secrets is hard. Then you get that again text in June, and then it all comes to a dead stop. Their final messages are exchanged on July 5th, 2019. The very next day, Jeffrey Epstein was arrested for the last time.
Before we go deeper into this economist Epstein-Harvard triangle of you buy, it looks bad, I need to remind you of something very important. If you like the show, hit that subscribe button, leave a review, tell your friends, tell your enemies, tell that one economist you met at a party who said, well, actually, GDP is a flawed metric, and you've hated him ever since. Your support helps keep this podcast going and prevents me from having to get funding from mysterious billionaires who just want to support education. No thank you now.
Now, it would be really easy to just stop here and dismiss this whole thing as a messy, awkward story about bad personal choices in elite circles. But the source material argues that if you only focus on that, you're missing the much, much bigger picture. The real peril here, it suggests, might be something else entirely. And this is where we make a hard pivot from the personal drama to the geopolitical chessboard. Because Keyu Jin isn't just an economist who got tangled up in this weirdness. She's also a very prominent and increasingly influential public voice in the West. And she has a very specific message about the US-China relationship. It's a message that the source says we really need to look at closely.
So what's her core argument? Well, in her writing and interviews, she consistently puts forward a few key ideas. First, that the West just seriously misunderstands what China wants. Second, that China has absolutely no ambition to replace the US as the world's top dog. Third, that all this tension we're seeing, it's mainly the fault of American restrictions and hostility. And her solution is always for us to go back to the good old days of engagement and peaceful coexistence.
So this sets up two very different ways of looking at the situation. You've got Jin's narrative, which paints a picture of a peaceful, rising China that's just misunderstood by a paranoid West. But then you have the source's critique, which suggests this narrative is actually a strategic tool, that she's essentially fulfilling the Chinese Communist Party's directive to tell China's story well by intentionally downplaying the regime's more aggressive and threatening actions.
And hey, this isn't just the source's interpretation. Jin has been called out on this directly. During an interview with the New York Times, the interviewer put it to her bluntly, saying, "You completely avoid the moral problems of the Chinese government." It's a criticism that comes up again and again, that her focus is always on what the West is getting wrong, while she tends to gloss over the very actions that are causing all the concern in the first place.
So how does she handle these tough questions? The source points to what it calls a pattern of deflection and minimization. You ask her about industrial espionage, she'll say technology transfer isn't really that effective anyway. You ask her about the human rights situation with the Uyghurs, she'll say she doesn't have enough information to comment. Media censorship? Oh, there's a vibrant debate space online. China's support for Russia? Well, that's the fault of US tech restrictions. The pattern, according to the source, is always the same. Redirect the blame away from Beijing.
So why does any of this actually matter? Well, because these narratives aren't just floating around in academic journals. When they're being promoted within the most elite circles in the West, circles that include people like Lawrence Summers, they have the real potential to shape policy. The argument is that this kind of messaging can soften the West's resolve and maybe even paralyze a tougher, more clear-eyed response to China's actions on the world stage.
Let's just take one of her most controversial claims. She's argued that Chinese people are generally willing to trade freedom for security. The source's response to this is pretty direct. Okay, where's the data? What survey of 1.4 billion people led you to that conclusion? And does that trade-off include the people in Xinjiang or the democracy protesters in Hong Kong? Who exactly is doing the trading here?
Ultimately, the source's entire critique really boils down to this one point. While Keyu Jin frames the conflict between the US and China as a two-way street, a mutual misunderstanding, her analysis and her proposed solutions consistently find fault with only one side, the United States. It's always America that needs to change its policies, while the actions of the CCP that prompted those policies are defended, excused, or minimized.
And that wraps up today's deep dive into the strange, elite ecosystem where finance, academia, and scandal swirl together like ingredients in a very cursed hot pot. Huge arigato to our brilliant producer, FireflyHaku, who managed to edit this episode without getting dragged into a congressional hearing. Truly heroic. If there's ever a scandal involving questionable spreadsheets and suspiciously well-organized data, you know Haku is behind the scenes whispering, "I can fix that." And of course, to all of you listening, thanks for sticking with me, laughing with me, and pretending this podcast isn't slowly eroding your trust in institutions. Until next time, stay curious, stay skeptical, and as always, watch your email threads, nay? They live forever.